Hello, everyone. I'm Michael E. Parker, and this is another coaching session. And today, I want to talk about some fundamental things related to building an organization. Now, when you think about that, a lot of times when we think about how we build an organization and what we need to do, and sometimes as a CEO, an entrepreneur, or even a business leader, someone leading a department, building teams, we have to think about how do I begin to organize people in a way that will be effective. Well, one of the things that we always do normally when we're building an organization is we start with whoever is kind of leading that organization. Now, if you're dealing with a company, of course, a lot of times you might deal with a CEO. And I'll start with looking at a business organization, but you could use this in a particular department or a specific function. But let's deal with a business, and we know that when we show ourselves building an organization, we want to show visually this individual, and they're at the top because they should be overseeing, right? Now, I'm going to talk about the way to structure a business and then the way that we want to look at the business in terms of levels of responsibility and what we should be doing, especially in what I call a value-centered organization. Now, when we look traditionally, we want to see that CEO. And we know as we begin to think about a CEO, when we have anything that falls right under this CEO, that is normally looked at as a support role to that specific role. So this could be a specific role. Let's make this an executive assistant. And what we're really showing here is that this is a right hand or a support to this upper role. Now, there's also more room to show other people that might be helping, this particular role, right? So there could be people that directly report to the CEO for support and help. Even if you're looking at things like a chief of staff or some other support role, like a senior project manager that reports directly to the CEO. But when you're building an org chart, you see this layer of support as direct support that actually assists the CEO in day-to-day responsibilities. And so there's a lot of ways to do this because this is kind of, you telling a story about how the organization works. And so you can do that in different ways. So again, we're showing this top level here more because this is an oversight role. And we're thinking about the oversight of the business. Now, as we continue further, as you begin to go further down this org chart, now you can have other support roles, and these support roles normally from top to bottom, as I begin to look at this, you're looking at people who do directly report to the CEO, but they may not be as active with the CEO. So sometimes people get as detailed as putting the people closer to the CEO that actually have to work closer with them from a time perspective and from a dependency perspective. If they're depending on them to do their direct work, they might be higher up in terms of how you visually show it. Sometimes people don't get that detailed, and all of these people equally impact and work with the CEO the same way. So we see the lines here, and all of these lines directly plug directly into the CEO. So when you're dealing with an org chart, you're always watching to see how you show the lines connected and who they're connected to that begin to tell a story. Now, I want to let's introduce the dotted line. And you can actually use a dotted line to show someone that supports any particular position on an org chart that doesn't report to them, but is a support to them, right? So report versus support is very important. Now this could be, let's use a strategic advisor. And this might be a strategic advisor that actually supports the CEO. They don't report to the CEO, but they support, again, the CEO. And that's why we're showing more of a dotted line. And so there can be different relationships that people have. Now, normally as you begin to get further into the org chart, you start to look at different functions that may or may not report to the CEO. But for sake of our example here, let's just take a few different areas, right? And depending on what type of business that we have, we might look at specific functions. So this might be a sales function. This might be a production function. And let's make this one customer service, right? So we might have these areas. So when we think about oversight, we have to then look at what are we overseeing? What are the main operations that drive the business? And so for this particular business, let's say it's sales, production, and customer service. So normally we need some sort of leadership role that oversees this, right? Now, depending on the size of the organization, we can make this a director level, could be an executive level, it could be a manager level, right? And so that's depending on the size of the organization in terms of how many layers do we need. So it's nothing, it's nothing wrong with determining how you want to tell that story. But normally, if you have some sort of leadership at these levels, you're going to then begin to define how teams work underneath this. Now, let's do some different versions. So with sales, let's say that this is a team that basically manages a group of salespeople that plug directly into this role. So this might look like this. And each one of these individuals, denoted by the letters that you see, might represent different people that report to this sales leader, right? So maybe it's more like a sales manager, and let's call this sales manager Sarah. Okay. Now, with production, we might get a little bit different. We might have someone here that manages, they have someone that assists them, and then we have other roles that then plug underneath that that manage specific things in production, right? So this tells a very different story than this tells. Here's a collaborative team that supports a leader, and then here's someone that oversees another leader who needs assistance and manages other functions. So these functions plug into this leader, and this is a support role that may be assisting there, right? So now we can also look at another structure where someone is plugging in here who then has other leaders plugging here and support teams that might support that particular level. So, and this particular team might be a little bit different. So now we see in the customer area, we have another leader who has two leaders reporting to them who then manage this particular side manages a team. This one has a specific person and something that assists them. Now, what dictates the difference between this side and this side? And it merely is responsibility and the level of work that is needed to support that function. So it might all support this specific area of customer service, but when you get down into the details, you may find out that one aspect of this particular area does not need a comprehensive team or a robust team, whereas another aspect might need that, but they all work together as one. So these are some elements to how you begin to build an organization. Now, when you look at this and you begin to explore some of these different areas, some of the things that you want to begin to evaluate is how many layers do we actually have, and how many layers is it to get decisions made, right? So when we think about all of this, at the end of the day, we're very concerned about decisions, right? We're very concerned about authority. How much authority do these roles have? And we want to make sure that we have definition. And definition means that we can have all these boxes, but we have to define what these boxes mean and what roles do they actually have. So keep these things in mind. Now, something I want to throw in here before we close this coaching session out. When we're building organizations and we're thinking about these things, one thing I want to remind you, and I talk about this in my book, Who Said So, is we want to keep in mind that the traditional aspect of looking at an organization is we look at things top down. And we focus on the top given direction to the bottom, right? And normally that's where we see our CEO at the top. But when we start to look at the organization and we take this chart, for example, and just flip it over, we start to think differently about the role of the CEO. And the goal is that we might structurally show the organization in terms of how to organize work, but in terms of how people feel and how the organization works, you want to think a little bit differently where the CEO is really at the bottom of the organization. You say, well, what in the world am I saying? Well, the CEO, if the CEO truly is stronger, if the CEO is knowledgeable, if the CEO sets vision and direction, they should be able to take more. When you're building a building, you put the rebar and the concrete and all of the toughest things in the foundation so that you can build something on it. So if you're trying to build an organization, you want to be foundational, meaning you can take more from everyone else. And then you begin to build layers on this foundation. And so we begin to build upward from that foundation, right? And so you have executives, right? You have directors. You may have managers, right? And I'll keep it simple and say we have a team, but ultimately at the top should be the customer, right? And so we, again, when we think about how we operate, we want the higher levels of the organization to be at the bottom, being a support and a structure and a foundation to the success of the business. And when you keep that in mind, as we get closer to the customer, the more important these roles are, because although we might see there are several elements here, really, when you look at the business, the team that is actually here touching the customer is extremely important, right? This is extremely important because they're the ones, no matter how good of a CEO you are, they dictate the real image and the betrayal of the business to the customer. And so you want to make sure that from the foundation, you've instilled things throughout this organization so that the people actually impacting the customer are actually giving the personality of the business, right? So you got your business personality, your brand, right? All of these things are dictated by the people who touch the customer, right? And that, again, comes from the managers who actually instill the right culture into the team. And then those that are given direction, right, to those managers become important. What goals did you set for them? What did you make the driver of their success? What do they feel their success is measured by? That dictates how they act and how they treat people. And then your executives that begin to give the vision from the CEO to the directors will also begin to establish culture. And again, but where did all of this start from? It started from the vision of the CEO. That CEO must have vision. That CEO must have culture. That CEO must have something in them that dictates the type of organization we're trying to build. And if we consider all those things, we can build a healthy organization as you see here. So to recap, we talked about how to structure an organization, how when we're organizing work, we start with our oversight. That is overseeing the business department or function. There are support roles that can be added, and then we can even have parallel roles that are direct or supporting roles that we see denoted by the dotted line. We talked about how you can then have different functions that are managed or overseen by the CEO or whoever that lead role may be, and that each of those functions might be set up very differently depending on how that particular function may work. And we're talking about all of these things being unique to what they're trying to accomplish. We shouldn't just build the organization, to make it look a certain way, but we want to build it based on what's happening, right? And show visually what that is all about. Then we talked about the difference between a top to bottom structure and top down thinking. We might have a top down structure to show how work is organized, but in theory, we want to operate in a bottom up fashion, realizing that the top of the organization should be closer to the customer. We are built to serve the customer. If the customer who drives what we actually do to make money, and I should add a dollar sign there, if they're the ones who buy the product, they're really at the top of the organization. They're really the king of the hill. And so we want to make sure that we acknowledge that, and all of it starts by having a strong foundation. And this is what we mean by building a true organization and what I call a value-centered organization. So I hope you got a lot out of that. I'm Michael Lee Parker. This has been another coaching session on building an organization, a value-centered organization. And I hope that you can take this information, consider how you're organizing things, and do the best that you can to help create an organization that can thrive.